Welcome to the Teaching Journeys podcast, hosted by Dave Roberts. Humanity possesses a unique skill, the ability to pass knowledge from one generation to the next. This podcast embraces that ability, offering learning opportunities through conversations with extraordinary guests. Dave aims to leave a positive mark on individuals around the world. So before you dive into today's episode, please share this podcast with your network, including friends, family, and colleagues. And please consider leaving a rating or review. Your support makes all the difference.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, and today it is my pleasure to have as my guest, John Geraghty. John Geraghaty's journey is one of profound transformation and empowerment. Faced with a future of uncertainty, he bravely confronted the consequences of his past choices, embracing responsibility and reclaiming control over his life's narrative. His journey led him to confront his struggles with alcoholism and shed disempowering beliefs that held him back. Through this process, he discovered the immense potential within himself and embarked on a path of purpose, joy, and impact. His positive transformation awakened him to the vast potential so many leave untapped and inspired him to dedicate himself professionally to coach and develop others to live their best lives. As a peak performance coach, speaker, the author of the Prism of Perspective, and the host of its accompanying podcast, John shares invaluable insights and practical principles for overcoming challenges, envisioning a compelling future, and optimizing life's experiences. John is also committed to challenging the hugely detrimental societal paradigms concerning the inevitable diminished capacity associated with aging. His holistic approach to life optimization includes aging powerfully, brilliantly, and joyfully, which led to the creation of Fitness Presence. This is an innovative method of exercise that maximizes results while minimizing time commitment and almost entirely eliminates the risk of injury, whether done alone or as a complement to a current routine. And with that, John, welcome to another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I am just thrilled to have you as a guest today.
Very, very happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. It's going to be fun.
It is going to be fun. I had the pleasure of guesting on your podcast, The Prism of Perspective, and we had a really great conversation, and I figured we would have another great conversation here. So today it's going to be all about the Prism of Perspective and other related concepts. But before we get into that, please tell our listeners about the experiences that have shaped your life path and your life passions.
So it really depends on how far back we want to go, right? So if I look at my life when some significant pivots began to happen, these original pivots can be in a negative way. I was a young teen and began to have some challenges. My parents were divorced. I was getting into high school. We were economically challenged. And until that time, it didn't really seem to matter because you're young and then all of a sudden you start to get into high school. And at the exact same time that was occurring, I had chronic or bad cystic acne. So which as looking back on it, as a 14-year-old kid, that's all that you think people can see. So it becomes this really thing that you're trying to run from. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, I had been a very good student and pretty athletic and things along those lines. And when I got into a bigger pond, all of a sudden I ran into competition. And rather than confronting the competition and bringing my best, I backed away. So if you think about the fixed and the growth mindset, I very much had a fixed mindset. I thought I'd run into people that were smarter, faster, better. And so for 15 years, from 14 to 29, it was very much just going through the motion. You talked about accepting responsibility. I really didn't accept responsibility. I had no vision for where I wanted to go. I was just meandering through life. As an alcoholic, it was not like I was under a bridge somewhere. I finished college. I had a job, but it wasn't really a career. It was a job that was fun for me and things along those lines. And it all fit in around my lifestyle, which was not very productive. And so the next pivot, I would say, is when I was 29 and I was dating a girl who happens to now be my wife. And she let me know she wasn't all that impressed with my drinking. And that although I was fun on some dates, she wasn't all that interested in hanging out much longer than that. And I became aware that what I heard there was not just that she wasn't really going to be interested, but I extrapolated and realized, like, who is going to be interested? Who's really going to be interested in this offering that I had? And so 29 on New Year's Eve, my current wife and the girl that I was dating at the time happened to be in Charleston, South Carolina. And I had made a decision that I was going to get sober about 5 days earlier. The third time in my life, I hit a curb while driving. I never got a DUI, I never had an accident, but I did that and flattened 3 tires, and I had just done that. And so when that happened, I was like, man, I got to give this up. And I was starting to be a little more reflective. And so I realized that I was going to have to make a change. And I remember we'd only been dating a few months. And so I went up there and I was like, and we were going to go on a double date with one of our friends. And I was like, I've decided I already quit drinking a few days ago, or we can go out tonight, we can have a good time, and then I'm done after that. She said to me, she was like, why don't you just come out tonight and then you can deal with it. Cause she told me, she was like, I didn't expect you to actually quit drinking. I didn't think, and also I was thinking is, okay, you're going to ruin my New Year's Eve. And then 2 days later, you're drinking with your buddies again. So funny, cause we went out and we had a good time and all those things. But I was a blackout drunk, not that night, but often. And so that night I went out, I can remember everything. So I look back on, even though there were lots of things demonstrated, I wasn't really thinking clearly. I made some choices I would never make sober. So anyway, at that time, I didn't really get into the AA program. I just began to do personal development work. And it was right at the time Anthony Robbins' work on personal power had come out. So I just listened to that nonstop. I listened to it over and over and over again. And the really pivotal piece of that work for me was what he calls the Dickens pattern. And the Dickens pattern is based on Charles Dickens' story of the Christmas Carol and Scrooge, and the idea that what you're looking at is you look at your past, present, and future, and think about how the choices that you're making in your past had negatively impacted you. So I thought about the idea that for 14, 15 years, I really hadn't accomplished much at all. I'd gone through high school, I'd gone through college, but I hadn't excelled at either. I had been a very good athlete, and I really didn't do much with my athleticism, nearly what I could have. And so I was like, clear the past had been injured. The girl that I'm dating right now is telling me she's really not that fired up about who I am. And I looked into the future and I recognized, okay, I'd hit a curb 3 times. I'd never hit another person. I never got a DUI, though I'd been pulled over a few times. That was going to run out. That was going to happen. So when I looked into the future, I was like, okay, so in the future, I have these negative consequences. And that shifted what Anthony Robbins called your neuroassociative conditioning, right? It shifts your association that you have with drinking. So for me, it no longer was like, oh, this fun thing that I do where all my inhibitions go away. And it became this dangerous thing that was going to lead me to DUI, prison, unsuccessful future. And when I got clear enough on that, the desire to drink really went away. And so since that time, 31 years ago, I haven't had a drink, and I've spent a lot of time continuing to develop my understanding of psychology and what really allows us to make effective choices. I've really gotten deep into health. I've studied flow pretty significantly. I've read a book a week for 30 years. And so in communication, relationship, organizational structure, anything that I can find that's going to be really helpful. And I have learned that I'm what they call a learner. If you look at StrengthsFinder, so my learner is my highest thing. And so I really enjoy learning, and coaching is an outlet so that it's not stagnant water, right? If you learn, but you can't share, you just have a stagnant pool of information. Coaching's a great tool for me to be able to share my insights and what I've learned with others who want to grow and develop. And so it's been a really rewarding and fun career. So kind of some of the pivots that have been important for me.
Those are significant pivots, particularly when you talk about being 31 years sober from alcohol. And congratulations, as a former addictions professional. I celebrate anyone who can overcome the challenges of addiction and lead a productive life and a drug sober free lifestyle for as long as you have. And a couple of things that struck me is that we all have a wilderness phase in our lives where we're just wandering and we're experimenting, we're doing things. And sometimes the choices we make get out of control, like it did with your alcohol. But one of the things that I liked was that I know you took a look at Anthony Robbins' principles and restructured how you wanted to live your life based on envisioning the consequences that could occur if you continued to drink. And that changed your whole relationship, I think, with drinking. But the other part, there are Native American teachings regarding crow medicine. I know we may have talked about this before, where with
You say Chrome?
crow, as in crow.
R-O-W, okay.
Yes, R-O-W. And there's a teaching with crow that says, honor the past as your teacher, honor the present as your creation, and honor the future as your inspiration. So whether you know it or not, what you did in addition to implementing Tony Robbins's principles, you took a look at crow. You were doing crow medicine.
I was doing it.
Yeah, you were doing it. And I'm a firm believer that every decision we make in our past contributes to the present that we have created for ourselves. But looking at the past and not staring at it, but learning at it allows us to create the future of our own choosing and allows us to alter our present narrative. And I think in your book, your protagonist, Sean James, I think had one of his challenges he overcame before he went in the business world was addiction. And we found it was a 12-step program. He went into the AA program and he really found a lot of comfort with that, and it helped them navigate that challenge. So as you were talking about that story, I immediately went into the Prism of Perspective, which probably segues into the next question I have, is about the book. What inspired the creation of the Prism of Perspective? What do you believe sets your book apart from other self-improvement books? And what do you want your readers to take away from it? So it's a three-part question, John.
So what inspired me is, as I've mentioned, for the past 30 years, I've been on a personal journey of development and evolution. And I've been a Sherpa for 1,000 people over that period of time to think about their lives. And in the work that I've done, and in the readings I've done, and my own experiences, my education, there's a lot of different tools that we can use for ourselves to get different insights and gain habits and perspectives and routines and ways of being that enable a better, more effective, productive, joyful life. And with the Prism of Perspective, I just looking at it for so long, I wanted to find places to put things so that I could make sense of them. I wanted to find a structure that allowed me to think about, in the prism, the main pieces of the prism are, I'll tell people the concept, right? So concept is very much, if anybody who's watched and seen the Dark Side of the Moon album cover, I always reference it because I kind of stole it. There you go, yep. So you see the white light coming into the prism, and it's refracted off of the three sides of the prism, which are your beliefs, your energy, and your present. And depending on how those three things come into play, you may actually have the same life circumstances, but live your life anywhere from being a victim, like, why has everything happened to me? And feeling like you can't do anything about it, to starting to get some energy, becoming a fighter. Then you become a negotiator, right? So it's a little less blunt, but it's toward the same end. Then you start to look at other people and think about, how can I make a contribution? You work your way up and say, how do I collaborate with others? How do I partner, which is really collaboration on a longer term? And then how do I co-create, which is really an idea that the universe is co-creating with you, right? That you're open to those co-creations everywhere. And so I was looking at beliefs and made up beliefs. And in my opinion, I looked at it and I said, there's beliefs I have about who I am in the world. I call those identity beliefs. There's beliefs I have about other people because they're, right? And so I call those beliefs of others. And then there's beliefs I have about the world. And so if I look at those elements, I wanted to find a way to hang them so that I could work. So then on the bottom, I have foundational energy. I have the positive psychology practices. Like, what are you doing? Because the foundational stuff's exercise, nutrition, sleep on that side, right? So everybody's kind of got that piece or is aware of it. Positive psychology practices, in my mind, if I'm going to work out every day, which I do, I should probably also work out my thinking, right? So what are you doing to work out your thinking? And positive psychology practices might include, there's a ton of them, right? Though some of them I play with: gratitude, forgiveness, compassion, visualization, breath work, meditation, mindfulness, journaling. And the way I kind of think about it is, you want to be working on your psychology consistently. Just like you don't show up to a sporting event not having trained. And so life is in some ways a sporting event, and there's going to be emotional challenges, and there's going to be things that you really need to be able to draw on positive psychology by thinking about them as practices and thinking about, are you putting them into your life as a practice? That gives you the capability so that when things are more difficult, which they are going to be, right? Things are going to pop up that are different than you wish they were. What are you going to draw upon? I don't want to reach into sometimes I'm about a set of golf clubs, right? I don't want to reach into a set of golf clubs and never have swung that particular club. So journaling might be a great idea to help me get clarity. I don't want to have that when my mind's a mess. Journaling is something I do consistently. So when all of a sudden my thinking's not really lining up, I can think, let me just write stuff down because I know how to do that, right? Or, you know what, I got triggered. I'm going to take a minute and do some breath work and get myself back so I'm much more present. And I think those things are elements that really make a difference. An adoption that I added more recently is really thinking about the importance of finding flow in your life as it relates to energy. So you're not losing it in either boredom or struggle, like finding that space in between. So what inspired me is thinking about all the things I'd studied and thinking about, how do I make a system that somebody can look at and really, one, evaluate how they're doing. Like, how are your identity beliefs serving you? Or how are your beliefs about others serving you? Or how are your positive psychology practices serving you? Or how's your self-awareness working for you? You can evaluate yourself, but then you also have a way of thinking about, how am I going to improve this area, right? These are different areas, and you might have a blaring red light that your energy basics aren't there. You're not sleeping well, you're not exercising, you're not doing nutrition. So then you can dive into it and think about, what are some practices I can embrace here? Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense to me. And I like the positive psychology philosophy because it emphasizes the strengths perspective, what a person can do as opposed to what they can't do. And I think the concepts that you mentioned lend itself to the whole process of collaboration, because one of the things that positive psychology talks about is, what is our civic responsibility to mankind? What can we do to make the world a better place? What can we do to forge better collaborations, to forge better partnerships? So all of that, all of those concepts lend to that, and I think is a really seamless coaching piece. It's a really, really nice toolbox that a coach or anybody can really build from. Speaking of flow, this is going to segue into another question. I wanted to ask you about this positive psychology concept of flow. What is it, and how can it help maximize our potential for both professional and future growth? And I also think there's some specific changes that occur in our brain chemistry when we're in flow. So if you can touch on all of that, that would be great.
So the concept has really been studied for a long time. So even if you look back early into Nietzsche's work, when he talked about Übermensch, right, the Superman, what was going on when people tap into their greatest powers. And then you work your way through into Maslow's work and his study of peak performers. Flow as a term was actually coined by another psychologist named Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. And what he was studying was, what are the states, the peak states, what's triggering peak states for people that enable them to be both joyful and productive. And so this was back in the beeper days. So he gave people beepers and he would just beep them periodically throughout the day, and they'd write down what they were doing and what their level of engagement was. And a lot of times people think that you're going to be the most joyful when you're in the greatest leisure. But what they really find is that you're most joyful when you're really challenged appropriately, not overwhelmed, but appropriately challenged, like right at the edge of your capacity. So flow really is that space between overwhelm and boredom, where you're working at the edge of your capacity, pursuing something of meaning toward you without dropping into overwhelm. And so you're really looking at, how do I find that balance? And when you do, your performance goes through the roof. In a self-reported, this is just a subjective study that was done by McKinsey with a lot of the executives, 10,000 executives they had around the world. They interviewed them and said, what's the impact of being in flow versus not being in flow? How much does it impact your performance? And they self-reported that they were 500%, 5 times more productive in flow than they were in either overwhelm or boredom. And they did some other work with the military to figure out like how fast people could learn different things. Depending on like how physiological it was versus psychological, it ranged from somewhere by 2 times faster to 7 times faster. And creativity was enhanced by 400%. So recognizing that, before I go try and push my way through something, I'm always trying to find the path of least resistance, not boredom, but so I don't want to run into something that's overwhelmed. Like when I run into overwhelm, rather than being a grinder, I'm a finder of flow, right? And a way that I try to make this metaphor work, one of the things I like to do for workout, really, I love to dance. And so I don't know if you've ever done one of those choreographed spin classes where you're really like dancing on a bike.
I have not had that pleasure yet, John.
So anyway, they exist. And so I really enjoy that. And one of the ways I can tap into flow all the time is I get into flow a lot through the physical piece. Mm-hmm. And my own fitness presence situation is that. And so is this. But the thing that's cool about spinning for me is like a lot of times if you're in a spinning class, especially you see the teachers and they're like, oh, you should be hating me right now. And, killing it. You should be dying. I'm never doing that, right? I'm always finding my ed that is challenging and fun. And they can do whatever they want. They're like, and that doesn't mean I don't work hard. Like I'll get my heart rate up way above what they tell me is my 100% as a 60-year-old. But I'm doing it in a way that's not overwhelming to me, right? I can still sing if I wanted to. I'm still having fun. If I go too far, that's what I was trying to say. If I go too far and I start to lose that capability, you can dial it back. You can just change the resistance. And so in your life, in my life, I speak for myself, when I find myself in a situation of overwhelm, I back off a little bit. I try to find flow again so that I can tap into the resources more effectively and achieve more rather than press against something that's not going to move. Yeah. Right. And all this does is waste energy. But if I pull back a little bit, I have much more fluidity. And you asked about the changes in the brain. So in flow, typically you'll go up against that and then you pull back. So you have struggle and then you pull back, you release a little bit, and then you drop into flow. And in that cycle, what's going on in your brain, you're going from high frequency, and it starts to drop into alpha and theta. So your brain, you're not as distracted. You're not pinging around as much. You're able to stay more focused. And the neurochemical impact is that in a typical state, a lot of our neurochemistry is being driven by the stress hormones of cortisol and adrenaline. And when we drop into flow, again, what happens is as you start to go through this little cycle, you're cleansed. There's nitric oxide cleanses out a lot of the adrenaline and cortisol, and you're releasing endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, anandamide. It's literally like a big, huge drug cocktail, right? In some ways, if you think about like serotonin is kind of that happy drug, right?
Yep.
You have dopamine, which is what cocaine hit does, right? It's a huge releaser of that. Norepinephrine is a speed. Anandamide is essentially what is released from THC, right? So you have this creative element.
Yep.
So what you have is you have this super drug cocktail that's created in your own brain, but it delivers the appropriate amount. So you're never overdoing it. And again, it's all endogenous. And what it does is that is what is enhancing your performance. So learning to structure your life so you have a lot of flow. One, it's really fun, right?
Mm-hmm.
It feels fantastic. And your performance is great. And so one of the things that I do in my own life and I teach others to do is structure your life so that you're able to focus. Because flow at some levels really rapt attention, right? I'm fully wrapped into the attention thing. And so you wrap your attention around whatever it is, but you can only do it for chunks of time, probably 60 to 90 minutes. And then you need to recover. So I think about like you're racing, you're going hard, but then you're going to pull out and plug back in rather than be somebody that goes to work and I'm going to work in a linear fashion all day long. And what ends up happening is your performance drops, but it's almost like the frog in the water. You can't tell that your performance is dropping because you're still giving your best. You're just not as productive. Your brain's not working as well. So you're not as intelligent. You're not as creative. You're not as collaborative. All these tools that we need to succeed in our time as knowledge workers, we're becoming less and less and less productive throughout the day. But if instead we take the time to plug back in, then we can stay in high flow and highly productive all day long, which is way more fun, right?
Yeah, it's whatever. I think we're more productive. I know when I'm in that state of flow, I'm one with the task. Time stops for me. I get the task done probably, it'll be an hour and I'll think, geez, where did the hour go? But it was because I was just so in tune with the task and my intuitive and creative juices were just at high peak levels and I'm able to get more stuff done in a shorter period of time when I feel that way. One of the best blogs, John, I ever wrote, I wrote in 45 minutes. You want to talk about being in flow. I was in flow, but also when you talk about a lot of the brainwave activities with alpha and beta and theta, that all I think governs our intuitive process as well too. And I think when we're in flow, our sense of intuition is heightened and we just intuitively get done what we need to get done without really giving it much conscious thought. And it becomes a much more effortless task. The key, I think, is maximizing our productivity when we're in a state of flow and realizing that when we're not, then we need to back off and maybe recharge, take a walk, get in touch with nature, meditate, do a little yoga to get those intuitive juices flowing again, and also kickstarting a lot of the neurotransmitters that are associated with pleasure, associated with happiness, associated with creativity. Recognizing as human beings when those limitations kick in and saying, okay, I need to back away and revisit this.
Right, absolutely. And what you mentioned being at one with and time. So what they talk about is in flow, you become one with action and after merge and time dilate, right? It might seem like a minute took an hour. It might seem like an hour took a minute. But what's really going on is the part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, is there's pieces of it that are shutting down so more energy can flow into the areas that we're really going to utilize. And parts that break down have to do with our self-consciousness and our tracking of time. So they call it transient hypofrontality, which basically means just for a brief period of time, part of your front brain is going to shut down. And so it's really an energy exchange. And your brain is making a decision that I'm going to take this, we have this goal and you're triggering into flow. We talked about being at the edge, but it's also clear goals, immediate feedback, challenge, skills, balance, right? Aligned with your purpose. There's 22 different triggers that you can have, but those are the real big ones. So when you structure your life to think about, am I clear? Clear goals does not mean I know what I want to accomplish 10 years from now. It means I know what I want to accomplish in this time block, right? Mm-hmm. And then immediate feedback is you have some mechanism that's letting you know, are you progressing, right? Are you doing the right thing? And that you want to set those up. So let's say you set up your time block and you gave yourself 60 minutes to do something and you find out that what you were committed to was really a 3-hour task. So you learn, and next time you say, okay, let me chunk that down smaller so that I can have an appropriate challenge, skills, balance. Sometimes challenge skills isn't whether you can do it or not. It's just, did you give yourself the resource of time to actually perform so that you're not hyper anxious, right? And really figuring that out. And it's different than what we've been taught a lot in kind of productivity style, laid out almost as if we're machines. We're not machines. We need to recharge. Machines need to recharge. Anything about an electric car, right? When their battery starts to go down, they don't have that insanity gear to go to. And you're trying to think about how do you keep your, we'll call it a sanity gear instead, right? But how do you be able to perform at that level. And it's really about making sure that you're not overwhelming yourself, that you're getting really clear on what you're trying to accomplish. Because what we want to pay attention to while we're in the task is the task.
Yep.
The task may be one of 10 tasks for this project. That's one of 10 projects for this outcome. You don't want to think about the outcome. We want to think about what we're doing right now. Thinking about the outcome pulls you out of flow, right? Thinking about the task is how we stay in flow.
And thinking about the steps that you want to implement to accomplish your task. Because if you do that and you have a solid plan, the outcome's going to take care of itself.
And you'll get feedback and know how to change, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
How to redirect.
Exactly. And we can learn how to do that. I think, probably in your coaching practice as well, you teach people to learn how to reevaluate, reassess, how to cue into things that are going on in their body, mind, that will tell them that, hey, we need to reassess, we need to step back, we need to just go back to the drawing board again. And I think that's important, that we are able to self-evaluate as we're in the midst of a task, as opposed to after we get done with it, realize that, geez, we've wasted 4 hours of time, and now we have to go back to the drawing board. It's good to help them become proactive and recognize that maybe we need to step back a little quicker and we need to reevaluate our strategy. So there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, so sometimes we think the one way we think to attack or tackle a problem is going to work. And then when we get into it, we realize that there are other factors that we hadn't anticipated that are going to change our plan and cause us to reassess. And it's just, anything we do, good or bad, gives us information in terms of how we can better ourselves going forward.
And the other piece that I think is really important here is when we talk about positive psychology basics, a lot of that is really getting yourself so that you understand what you feel like when you're in a great state. So that when you don't feel like that, that can become an alarm. Meditation is not so you can become a better meditator. Meditation is about self-awareness. What am I feeling? Can I observe it without getting sucked down into it? And so when you have these positive psychology practices that you do on an ongoing basis, when you're in life and all of a sudden you're being triggered in a way that's not productive, then you have an opportunity to be more self-aware and make that pivot earlier, rather than even looking at the end of the day and saying, man, I struggled all day. When you start to recognize you're struggling, not that you don't have some moments of that you have to push through things, but when you really feel like your momentum's stopping and that it's really feeling like a big struggle, that might be a time to take a walk around. A lot of our great ideas, our solutions don't come. They hardly ever come when you're pushing.
No.
They come when you're giving yourself some space.
Or when you're sitting in the quiet and just reflecting, and all of a sudden the answer just comes to you. The path that you need to take becomes very clear.
There's a thing they call the MacGyver, the guy that wrote MacGyver calls this thing the MacGyver Effect. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the show, the idea is that there's this special agent or whatever. He's really great at solving problems with whatever happens to be around him at the time, right? He builds a little contraption or a bomb out of a paperclip and some duct tape or whatever happens to be. And so the guy that was writing MacGyver would do, if he ran into a situation where he couldn't figure out, like, what would MacGyver do? He would leave work, go home, take a shower, and come back to work. And he found that just letting go of trying to press for an answer, like while he was taking a shower, I know what to do, right? And so I think the same thing is true for us in our lives. We're not writing a screenplay, but we are facing challenges. And what we want to do is recognize that what we're doing is we're taking the resources that are available around us. Part of your beliefs is, especially if you have a belief in co-creation, and then you're looking for solutions. If your belief and your energy are putting you in a place of victimhood, you're not even going to see them. You're not going to see the resources that are available because your story is that there are none and that there's nothing you can do. And so really thinking about, is your belief system set up so that you're going to be really receptive to the resources that are around? I talked about my own struggles early on. I was very unresourceful. I had just fallen into a very meandering, even sometimes you think about the wilderness and this bravery, Mine was more of a letting time pass by me and really almost staying away from challenge. And part of it was not seeing all the resources that I had within me that I could use to change the trajectory of my life. And so for that reason, I was very stagnant. Sometimes I underplay it because it's been a long time, but really 15 years of your life to not be really moving forward and tapping into your capabilities. Certainly not the only person that's done it, but it's certainly not something I'm encouraging. I have young girls. I'm not like saying, blow off your 20s and don't worry about it. I don't want anyone to worry about anything, but build your strengths and your gifts and your talent and pursue things that matter to you. And who knows exactly where it's going to go, but do that wholeheartedly. You do that wholeheartedly, it's all going to work out. Like you said, you do the right practices. We make it in the end, but it's really about how do we go about it?
For some people, the wilderness phase lasts longer than others, but those 15 years, there'll be a time where you'll look back on that, John, and you'll realize, and I'm sure you already have, that there were some valuable teachings that you got from those 15 years. And also, and I used to talk to the individuals with substance use issues that I worked with when I was a addictions counselor. I would ask them, take a look at your deepest, darkest days of your addictions. Let's see if we can find some strengths. What were some things that allowed you to develop resilience to get to this point? You just didn't get here through smoke and mirrors. You developed resilience. Let's take a look back at even what you believe were your darkest days, your worst days, and let's take a look and see what strengths you developed during that time that we can use now moving forward to help you achieve your goals of sobriety. No time is ever not well spent. We may look at that and say, yeah, I wish I could have done something differently.
It'd be better spent.
15, it'd be better spent, but it was spent.
I could learn my lessons faster.
You could have,
I did.
But you were meant to spend that time the way you spent that time. If you didn't, you wouldn't be where you are now. And that gets back to the past determining the present of our creation and the future of our inspiration.
One of the things that I absolutely learned, so the job that I had for a while, I paid my way through school. While I was going to school, I was working full time. And I had a job as a salesperson at a really nice health club. And the club itself called Gainesville Health and Fitness Center. And it's been recognized as written up in Fortune magazine a bunch. And there's a book called Little Big Companies, and it's written up in there. And the guy, Joe Cirilli, that owned it, we're very different in that he's a much more conservative person than I am. But he definitely was instrumental he was somebody that was very much into personal development. So at least I had, and even while I was drinking, I was exposing myself to Brian Tracy and Dennis Waitley and Wayne Dyer. And so a lot of those things came through that. And the other thing is that it was a really high volume health club. So I was in 40 sales meetings a week, one-on-one, talking to people about their goals and objectives and what they want to achieve and how we might lay out a plan. It was around health and fitness, but it was a very thorough, comprehensive fact finder that we did. And so when I look at everything I've done since, I went from there into financial planning, into coaching. And it's really all been around that idea that I'm having a conversation with people about where they are today, what they'd like to achieve in the future, like what are the blocks and barriers that have gotten in the way in the past? How can we structure things to make it more likely that whatever their desired outcome is? So I absolutely learned a set of skills that I continue to use today. Interestingly enough, as I came to the end, I didn't recognize it for a few years.
Yep.
So I didn't really give myself as much credit for my capabilities because I was seeing it as this narrow thing of being able to sell health club membership rather than being able to connect and communicate and influence and motivate and inspire. I had a much smaller definition of what it was that I was doing.
Yeah. And I think time away from any phase in our life gives us different perspective when we look at it and say, hey, these lessons came up, this path came up that has helped me today. And we lose sight of it when we're in it and when we're trying
Right.
to survive it, or we're trying to make sense out of it. So
It is funny when you map all the little things that happened in your life and see how these really weird things have all contributed to where you sit today. Yeah, it's a fun thing.
yeah, and as I get older, as I progress, I'm 69 now, I will look at the past, and not because I want to do anything differently. I just want to see what I did and how I did it, how it's contributing to the choices I'm making today. It's that whole look back on your life type of thing and see what influences allowed me to live the life that I'm choosing to live now. And it's an interesting process, particularly when we look at the past as an ally as opposed to an enemy.
Right. Absolutely. I think when I look through that same frame, I'm able to see I do love where I've landed. And I also feel very much that as a 61-year-old, firing on more cylinders than I ever have. One of the beliefs that I think we have as a society that I attempt to challenge is that we're this aging arc. I'm not saying that we're all eventually going to lose our capabilities, right? Eventually.
Mm-hmm.
But we play such a huge role in that. And so I don't know if part of my motivation comes from the fact that I blew off those 15 years. And I'm feeling like I want to continue to make them up and I'm going to put mine at the end or whatever it happens to be. But I definitely feel that we've been sold a bill of goods about how we're going to age. I mean, the whole idea of retirement was manufactured. And I have empathy for people that have very physical jobs where they're on their feet all day long and they're doing things along those lines. People that have had the opportunity to create work around what we love to do, I don't have any idea why we would want to stop doing it. Right? You love the work you do. I love the work I do. I have no interest in setting up a thing where I have a drop date and I'm like, oh, at 65, I'm checking out, or 70 or whatever. As long as we can contribute, I think that we should be continuing to think about how do we contribute? What are the gifts or the teachings or energy or resources that we can do to make a bigger difference? It's going to inspire us. And it's going to add a lot of value to others as well.
Yeah, my mother, God rest her soul, used to say, age is just a number. She was 77 years old and she was still very actively engaged in life until the day she transitioned. For me, I feel I'm in the best physical shape that I've ever been at 69 than I ever was at 39. I feel that my mind, body, spirit health is in alignment. I feel that I'm engaged in life. As long as I can stay engaged and productive, and continue to commit to learning as well as teaching, I could go on until my body says I can no longer go on anymore, until the good Lord says your time's up, you've done enough. On this planet, we're going to let you dance in another dimension. And I tell individuals, don't buy into the whole ageism thing. Age is just a number. It's how you treat life. It's how you look at your outlook. It's how engaged you remain. It's how you see yourself as being viable. And it's also being amongst individuals who will support your contributions, support your viability, and continue to nurture that. And also a community where you can continue to learn from and continue to grow.
There's a book, From Strength to Strength. Arthur C. Brooks is the author. He's a professor at NYU. And he actually, what the book is about is that we have different types of strengths. And when we're young, it's much more of a doer strength, when as we age, it's more of a mentoring strength. Yep. And I think one of the things that is important about understanding as we age, like, how do you contribute the best? And so I do a lot of work in the financial services industry because I spent time there. And when people are getting started in that industry, it's a very challenging, almost like just on this side of a grind, right? I would still tell people don't grind, but you're going to be putting in a lot of particular effort in directions and things along those lines in ways that a 60-year-old not going to be as excited about doing. But that 60-year-old can be teaching his whole team about how do they do that work so that they build those muscles and that the whole organization contributes at its highest level. But because each person's really honoring where they are and what are your real gifts. And I think that's an important thing. We're seeing right in front of us, right, being played out, some of the consequences of aging. And again, I'm not seeking to be ageist at all, but I'm looking at some skills that you would, or capabilities that are going to be necessary in order to address work. And while I'm a big believer in aging powerfully, brilliantly, and joyfully, I'm also a big believer in paying attention to what are the things that you're going to do well, and are there some things that really are not going to get better for you? And if they're necessary for the work you're doing, don't stop contributing. But how do you pivot so that you can contribute in a way that really does align with the energy and the resources and the experiences that you have? It's almost like the idea of you have, after somebody's been the chairman of the board or whatever, you might be chairman emeritus, right? And he continues to contribute, but he's not the chairman of the board. He's still sharing insights and ideas, and he's honored and things along those lines. But being the chairman of the board or the CEO is a big job that requires a lot of energy. And if you have that when you're 80 years old or 90 years old, good for you. But if you don't, I think it's really important that we also pay attention to think about where's really my best contribution. Right? Even in the physical world, like the way I exercise very intelligently. I'm not injuring myself is at the top of my objectives. So in the past, things I would do as a 20-year-old, I'm not saying they were smart to do as a 20-year-old, but you recover quicker and you don't have the same risk. And so just like physically, cognitively, I think it's really important that we pay attention to what our capabilities are and think about how do I add those capabilities in the best way? Because we can keep doing that forever.
Exactly. And you mentioned as we get older, we become mentors because of our experiences, because of what we've seen. And the other thing as mentors, I mean, if we're mentoring a team, we can teach individuals within that team to recognize their own unique strengths. And then when an individual comes to them for help, the mentor can delegate or can teach individuals to say, okay, this coach is really good with physical health. This coach is really good with cognitive restructuring. And then that person becomes, instead of the property of one person, for lack of a better term, the team has ownership over the outcome of that individual. And I think so often, I always talked about this off prior to recording, I think where teams lose their ways is where everybody gets really discipline bound and discipline specific and say, this is my client, and nobody gets together to pull the strengths of those individual disciplines for the betterment of the person's personal and professional growth. And that's one of the things I liked about the Prism of Perspective is that Sean James had a whole team of individuals with unique skills that gave him the specific tools he needed within each individual piece that he needed to improve upon. The book models appropriately how the team perspective should play out, not only in the public sector, but in the private sector.
Yeah, thank you for that. I study a pretty broad array of things. I do a fair amount of study of like organizational structure, but if a business is, that's what their challenge is, I'm not your guy. Like I can have a high level conversation with you, but I'm not going to be and I'm not wired that way. No. Now, if you're having challenges with getting really crystal clear on a purpose for your organization or casting a vision, or you're having challenges with communication or relationship, like that's where I live, right? That's my sweet spot. But a lot of times as a coach, people are having different ideas about scalability or what does this structure look like? And I'm like, I can talk to you about it conceptually, but I'm not going to be your best resource at all. You know, many people, that's their area of strength. I'm going to give that referral. And what seems to work best is when people, whether they have multiple coaches or multiple mentors, or they're structured in an organization that's matrixed and has different places that you're touching, we all have the ability to learn anything, but we're not going to be world-class at anything. We're going to be world-class at what we're naturally wired to do. And pay attention to that and stay in that space. That's your zone of genius.
And ethically, we are obligated to refer a client, whether they're looking for coaching services or therapeutic services, to somebody with the strength or skill set that we don't have. Because everything we do needs to be in the best interest of the client. And even though we are not working with that client, we're still building for that moment a collaborative relationship by acknowledging our limitations and maybe forging a future partnership, because that person might come back and use us as a resource for a skill set that we are strong in. I think there's a lot to be said for ethical practice. I think it reaps more benefits, maybe not immediate benefits, but more long-term benefits.
And it honored us, right? Because I think one of the challenges is if you don't know what you should be saying yes to and what you should be saying no to, there's this idea of we have these different zones: zone of incompetence, zone of competence, zone of excellence, and zone of genius. And so obviously we're not spending time in our zone of incompetent. Like what we were talking about is I might be competent as that organizational structural design guy, but I'm not excellent, and I'm certainly not in my zone of genius. And so what we're really trying to do is figure out, how do we spend our time in the places where we're creating the greatest reward for others, and we're receiving the greatest reward because it's what feels natural.
Yep.
And I'm not at all suggesting that we don't challenge ourselves and there's not struggle in our zone. It just feels different.
Yep.
Right? It just feels different when you're in your zone. And for me, that's when you're listening to what somebody wants, you're in building your business, you're interviewing them at least as much as they're interviewing you. You're not, I always talk about the idea of, like, you ever seen this show, The Bachelorette or The Bachelor? Or
Yeah, I'm familiar, vaguely familiar with it.
Vaguely familiar. I actually watched it one time because I had a cousin whose ex-husband was on it. But anyway, the thing that I think is important there, I always call it the Bachelorette Effect, is like you have this 27-year-old female that's attractive and smart, and whatever she happens to be, and everybody in the show wants to marry her. And I'm like, what happened? Like, she's 27 and she's not married. Not that there's something wrong with that, but everybody wants to marry her. She's the perfect fit for everybody. And I think a lot of people go about job interviews in the same way.
Yeah.
Or client interviews. Like, I have an interview with a client. My objective is to sell that client on my services. Regardless if you really think this is a fit for you and them, and is it going to really enlighten you, or are you going to both grow really well?
Yep.
Where what we really want to be doing is thinking, are we two people that come together with what you're looking for and your needs and your temperament and my skills and my desire to add value? Or is it something like, I can make this work, and you may grab a client, but you're wasting energy and you're probably going to be burning out because you're not really inspired by what you're doing. Whereas if the client that you're working with are really in alignment with what you're looking for, it's an inspirational thing, and you get energy at the end of the day.
Yep.
You can literally feel more energized than you did at the beginning.
Absolutely. John, I got one last question for you, because our time is coming to a close, and I wish we had about another hour, but perhaps I'll have to do
having fun. Yep.
I'm having fun too. I'll have to do a return visit at some point. But
absolutely,
if people want to get in touch with you, they want to contact you about your services, find out more about your book, purchase your book, what's the best way for them to do that?
The easiest way is probably Courageous Authenticity, which is the website. But you can get the book through Amazon. It's on there. You can do the podcast, The Prism of Perspective. Fitness Presence is the approach to fitness that I use. So fitnesspresence.com. So all of those are ways of getting in touch. And so I'd love to chat with anybody. If you feel that you are looking for a way to create greater alignment with your purpose, passion, vision, and strength, and there's a lot that even the people that tend to enjoy the services best are really thriving in a lot of ways, right? I'm not doing counseling or therapy work. I'm working with people that are really pretty healthy, but that are recognizing that there's a gap between where they are and really where they'd like to end up. And they're interested in shrinking it. If you're in a gap and you like that gap, and that's fine, that's great. But if you really want to continue to grow and develop, and you think having a different structure that would allow you to look at your life in a new way, and to build systems in so that you can improve all the areas you'd like to improve. Come give me a call. Happy to have a half-hour conversation, see if it's a great fit. If so, that's awesome. If not, hopefully you'll learn something anyway in the journey, right?
Yeah, I think we can all learn something from any interaction we have, no matter how long or short it is. John, thank you so much for being a guest today on the Teaching Journeys podcast. I truly enjoyed our conversation, and I hope we can do it again sometime.
Yeah, we absolutely will. Thank you so much. You have a great day. I appreciate it. Did a great job.
Thank you, John. That is a wrap on another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, wishing you peace.